I want you to picture this, a long summer evening in Texas, the kind where the air hangs heavy with barbecue smoke and the cicadas hum as if they own the land. The Carter family ranch glowed that night, string lights draped across the oak trees, tables lined with brisket and cornbread, neighbors laughing, glasses clinking. Pride filled every corner of that yard, but not for me. Because in the middle of all that joy, my father, the man whose approval I had chased for 35 years, stood before a crowd of 100 people, raised his glass high, and toasted my younger brother. He praised Daniel, the lawyer, the prodigy, the son who could do no wrong. And when his eyes finally landed on me, the daughter who had just returned from leading a mission halfway across the world, risking her life for strangers, all he said was this: "What does a daughter know about honor? That's a man's business. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible in the very place you should have belonged? Have you ever swallowed words that burned in your chest just to keep the peace? If you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or told you weren't enough, then you already know what that moment did to me." Before I take you deeper into my story, before I show you the secrets my family kept, the betrayal that nearly destroyed me, and the truth that finally set me free, I want to pause for just a second. If stories like this speak to you, if you believe in courage, resilience, and the quiet kind of revenge that comes from living with integrity, then take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It means you'll be here with me for every chapter, every twist, every revelation. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Now let's go back to that night. The crowd cheered for Daniel, clapping so hard the silverware rattled on the tables. My father beamed, pride radiating from him like the Texas sun. My mother smiled too, though hers was smaller, tighter, the kind of smile you wear when you've practiced silence for decades. Daniel soaked it in, the applause, the spotlight, the mantle of being the Carter legacy. He had always been their golden boy. I stood near the edge of the patio, half in the shadow, the rim of my glass sweating in the humid air. My uniform hung in the closet upstairs, still carrying the scent of dust and diesel, but I hadn't worn it tonight. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I blended into a summer dress and sandals, my father might look at me and see a daughter, not just a soldier. I was wrong. The sting of his words lingered, but what came next burned deeper. Because just as I forced a polite smile, just as I willed myself not to flinch, the television in the corner of the deck, set up so people could watch the evening news between courses, flickered with breaking headlines. And there it was, my face, my name, my voice carried over footage of helicopters and evacuees, the anchor declaring, "Colonel Alina Carter led the successful humanitarian mission in Eastern Europe, evacuating over 300 civilians to safety." The crowd went silent. Forks froze midair. The image on the screen was undeniable, me in uniform, issuing orders with calm precision, guiding frightened families onto trucks. It was the kind of footage that should have earned applause, respect, pride, but not a single hand clapped. Not one. I looked around that sea of familiar faces, neighbors I had grown up with, cousins who had played tag with me in the fields, even my own parents, and I saw only discomfort. As though celebrating me would somehow take something away from Daniel. As though my victory was an embarrassment, not an honor. So I smiled, a brittle, practiced smile. And inside, my heart sank like a stone in the Brazos River. Have you ever had a moment like that, where the world finally sees your worth, but the people you need most turn their backs? That was my moment of truth, though I didn't recognize it yet. At the time, I only knew the silence hurt more than any battlefield wound I'd ever carried. I wanted to speak, to say, "That was me. I did that. Doesn't it matter?" But the words caught in my throat. Because in my family, my silence had always been easier for them to live with. It would take months before I learned the full truth, that this silence was not just indifference, but a carefully constructed betrayal. That my father and brother would go further than I ever imagined to erase me, to steal what I had bled for, to redefine honor on their terms. But that night, all I had was the sting of humiliation and the weight of a truth I couldn't yet name. I remember stepping off the deck, walking across the yard toward the barn, the grass cool under my bare feet. The laughter and music faded behind me, muffled by the thick Texas air. I leaned against the wooden beams, staring at the horizon where the sky bled into deep indigo. And I thought maybe they'll never see me. Maybe I could save 1,000 lives, win medals, even give my own life, and it still wouldn't matter. Because I wasn't Daniel. Because I wasn't the son. But I also thought if honor isn't something they can give me, then maybe it's something I have to claim for myself. That was the beginning. That was the seed of everything that came after. So stay with me, because what started as a family dinner in Texas turned into a war I never expected. A war not fought overseas, but inside my own bloodline. A war where silence was as sharp as any weapon, and truth was the only armor I had left. By the end of this story, you'll understand why I walked away from everything I had ever known, and why I built something entirely new out of the ashes of betrayal. Because the truth is this: honor is not inherited, it is built. And this is how I built mine. When the night of that family gathering ended, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the familiar ceiling with its faint cracks, the ceiling I had once counted every night as a girl. And like an unwelcome guest, the memories began to creep back in, uninvited yet unrelenting. Isn't it strange how a single remark, a single slight, can open the floodgates to years you thought you had buried? That night, my father's words, "That's a man's business," echoed against those walls, and with them came the story of a lifetime of being less. I want to ask you something. Have you ever carried scars no one else could see? The kind that never fully heal because the wound was opened again and again in small, cutting ways? If so, you'll understand what I'm about to tell you. And if you're new here, if this story resonates with your own journey of being overlooked or undervalued, take a moment now to subscribe and stay with me. Because in telling you my story, I want to remind you of your own strength too. As a little girl, I had always loved to run. There was a hill behind our ranch, not too steep but tall enough that if you stood at the top, you could see the Brazos River shimmer like liquid silver in the distance. I would run up that hill every day after school, legs burning, lungs fighting for air, and when I reached the top, I'd throw my arms wide and pretend I was unstoppable. That hill became my secret proving ground. In high school, that love turned into medals. Track and field, cross country, I brought home ribbons and trophies, proud and eager to lay them at my father's feet. And I'll never forget the first time I won state. The crowd roared as I crossed the finish line, the gold medal swinging heavy and glorious around my neck. I ran home, still wearing it, sweat drying on my skin, ready for his embrace, his pride. But when I held it up to him, he barely glanced at it. Instead, he said, "Well, that's nice, Alina, but your brother just got an A in calculus. That's what really matters." His words struck like a cold wind, dousing my fire. I told myself it was just one moment, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of a pattern. Do you know what it's like to be compared endlessly to someone else, no matter what you achieve? To have every triumph measured against another's? If you've lived in someone's shadow, let me know in the comments. I think many of us carry that silent weight. I fought to prove myself in every way I could. When Daniel was praised for academics, I doubled down on athletics. When he was called brilliant, I became relentless. But no matter how fast I ran, no matter how many medals I won, I could never outrun his shadow. There's a box in the basement of my parents' house, one that still sits under layers of dust. Inside it are photographs of me in my ROT uniform, letters from commanders commending my discipline, my degree from West Point rolled neatly in its tube, never framed, never hung. It's a box of proof that I had lived, I had achieved, I had served. And yet to my family, it was no more important than a shoebox of old bills. They tucked it away as though it were clutter. Meanwhile, Daniel's achievements, every plaque, every certificate, every tiny ribbon from a high school debate, were framed, polished, hung proudly along the staircase wall where every visitor could admire them. That wall became a gallery of his life. My box, meanwhile, became a graveyard of mine. When I deployed overseas, part of my pay was sent home. I did it gladly, thinking of the family ranch, of the roof that always leaked when it rained, of the barn that had been begging for repair for years. I imagined my contribution would patch the holes, keep the place safe, make my parents' lives easier. It gave me comfort while I slept on cots and ate cold rations, to believe I was still providing something back home. But when I returned, the roof still sagged, the barn still leaned, and the money was gone. Later I learned the truth. It had been used for Daniel's tuition, his dream of law school. My sacrifices had paved his way. They had traded my sweat and blood for his future. Have you ever discovered that your hard work was used for someone else's gain, without your consent? That the trust you gave was quietly twisted into fuel for someone else's story? If you have, you know the gut punch that comes with that revelation. I remember one night overseas, the desert sky stretched endless above me. I was writing a letter home, telling them I was safe, telling them about the children we'd given water to that day, how their smiles were brighter than the sun. I slipped in a few bills, extra from my own pocket, and told my parents to use it for something nice, maybe finally fix that old piano in the living room. I imagined them sitting around it, Daniel playing as we sang. But when I came home months later, the piano was gone. Sold, my mother said, to help with Daniel's apartment rent in the city. She said it casually, as if it were the most natural decision in the world. For them, maybe it was. For me, it was another fracture, another reminder that no matter what I gave, it was never really for me. I don't share this to make you pity me. I share it because I know I'm not the only one. Some of you listening right now have also been the ones who gave, who sacrificed, who carried the weight, only to see your efforts brushed aside or credited to someone else. If that's you, I want you to know this. Your worth is not diminished just because others failed to recognize it. The hardest part wasn't even the dismissal. It was the quiet way it rewrote my own belief about myself. Slowly, I began to think maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't the child to be proud of. Maybe all my striving was just noise compared to Daniel's brilliance. That doubt clung to me through college, through basic training, through my first deployment. It was a ghost that whispered at every milestone, "You're still not enough." And yet I kept going. Because somewhere deep inside, beneath the doubt, was a fire that refused to die. A fire that told me if they won't see your worth, then build it for yourself. There's something I want to ask you. If you've ever been overlooked by your family, your workplace, by people who should have seen your light, what kept you going? Was it anger? Was it faith? Was it the quiet belief that one day the truth would speak louder than silence? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your story because this isn't just about me. It's about all of us who have been unseen. Looking back, I realize now that every slight, every dismissal, every sacrifice redirected toward Daniel, it was forging me in ways I couldn't yet understand. The medals they ignored taught me that external applause was fragile. The money they misused taught me that sacrifice had to come with discernment. The silence taught me to listen closely to my own voice, even when no one else would. It didn't make the pain less real, but it gave it purpose. There was one night, my last year at West Point, that stays etched in my memory. I had just finished a grueling field exercise, 48 hours with almost no sleep, rain soaking us to the bone. I limped back to my bunk, exhausted but proud, and found a letter waiting for me. It was from my father. My hands shook as I opened it, hoping for pride, for acknowledgement. Instead, it was 3 lines long. Daniel won his moot court competition. We're so proud of him. Hope you're doing fine. That was all. That was the measure of me, an afterthought in my own story. I crumpled the letter in my fist, tears mixing with the rain still dripping from my hair. And I swore to myself then I would no longer live for their approval. I would build my own definition of honor. But here's the twist. When you stop chasing someone's approval, sometimes they don't let you go easily. Sometimes they fight harder to keep you in the role they've assigned you, the lesser, the quiet one, the daughter who stays in the shadows. And as you'll see in the chapters ahead, my family wasn't done trying to silence me. They were just getting started. So stay with me, because this is where the story begins to shift. The child who was overlooked became the soldier who refused to break. And yet, even then, I couldn't have predicted the depths of betrayal that were still to come. And before we dive into those storms, let me ask, are you with me so far? If this resonates with you, if you've ever felt like the forgotten one in your own family, go ahead and hit the like button. It tells me this story matters not just to me, but to you too. Because the truth is, we all have boxes in the basement, memories, achievements, pieces of ourselves that others never valued. But those boxes don't define us. What we choose to build with them does. And that is the journey I'm about to take you on. It started with whispers. Whispers so faint that at first I dismissed them as noise. In the military, rumors bloom like weeds. You learn early on not to chase every shadow. But this one had teeth. Captain Ross was the first to bring it to me. He showed up at my office door, his face tight, the kind of expression you only wear when you know you're about to wound a friend. He slid a manila folder across my desk. I remember the sound of it scraping the wood. Such a small sound, but one I'll never forget. Inside were articles, glossy profiles, glowing op-eds. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. My eyes skimmed headlines like Daniel Carter, a rising star, the future of leadership, the Carter legacy. There was his face, my brother's face, staring back at me, polished, rehearsed, safe. "Ross," I asked, confused, "what does this have to do with me?" He tapped one page, his jaw clenched. "Read that." And so I did. The words blurred, but the meaning hit sharp. The Carter family has long exemplified service. Daniel Carter, following in the footsteps of his father, carries forward a tradition of honor. No mention of me, not a single line about the mission I had led, the civilians I had saved, the lives my team had risked under my command. It was as if I had never existed. Tell me, have you ever watched yourself be erased in real time? Have you seen your story rewritten, your contribution carved away until someone else stood where you once had? If you felt that sting, hit the like button right now. Because what I felt in that moment wasn't just betrayal, it was annihilation. The days that followed were worse. I began noticing gaps, interviews I'd been scheduled for suddenly rescheduled. Invitations to speak at conferences evaporated. Calls went unanswered. It was subtle at first, but I knew enough about strategy to recognize a campaign when I saw one. Meanwhile, Daniel's name exploded across the media. He was hailed as a voice for humanitarian values in American policy. He was the promise of a new generation, the son of the Carter family carrying the legacy forward. I would sit in my apartment, watching the news play his words, my words, repurposed, polished, delivered from his lips as though he had ever set foot in the places I had bled. I'd hear him say, "We must always remember that true leadership is service." And I'd grip the arm of my chair so hard my knuckles turned white, because I knew where he had heard those exact words from me years ago in the quiet of our kitchen when I thought he was listening as a brother. You tell me, what hurts more? When strangers doubt you, or when your own blood steals the voice out of your throat? Drop your answer in the comments, because I want to know if you've ever been there too. One night I called my mother. My voice shook. Did you see it? Did you see what he said? Her tone was light, almost distracted. Oh, yes, wasn't he wonderful? Finally, someone from this family is being recognized. Her words cut deeper than any battlefield wound. Because in that single sentence, she confirmed what I had feared all along. They never wanted me to be the face of the Carter name. It wasn't just at home. At church, neighbors patted my father on the back, congratulating him on raising such an extraordinary son. At family reunions, relatives toasted Daniel's brilliance. And when I walked in, uniform crisp, ribbons shining, the air shifted. Polite nods, awkward smiles, but no pride. Never pride. I became a ghost in my own family's story. But here's what they didn't count on. Shadows stretch long. They linger. They hold secrets. And one day they can rise. The breaking point came in a briefing room at the Pentagon. I had just finished a detailed presentation about our last mission, showing maps, relaying strategies, explaining how we had negotiated under fire to save every civilian we could. I poured out the truth of what had happened. Afterward, a young lieutenant approached me, hesitant. "Colonel Carter," he said, "I don't mean disrespect, but I thought your brother had coordinated that effort through his legal work. That's what I read in the papers." For a second, the floor beneath me seemed to tilt. "What did you say?" He pulled up an article on his phone. There it was in black and white, Daniel Carter credited for behind-the-scenes coordination of my mission. I stared at it, my throat dry. "That's not true," I said quietly. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew the damage was done. Doubt had been planted. Here's a question for you. If someone stole your work, your voice, your very identity, how would you respond? Would you scream? Would you fight? Or would you wait, gathering truth like ammunition until the timing was right? Think about it, because I had to. That night, I drove to my father's house. We sat in his study, cigar smoke curling in the air. The same study where, as a girl, I had once shown him my medals, desperate for him to be proud. "Why?" I demanded. "Why are you letting this happen? Why are you letting Daniel take what isn't his?" He leaned back, steepling his fingers, his expression cold. "Because, Alina, you will never be the face of this family. You don't understand politics. You don't understand legacy. Daniel does. He carries the Carter name in a way you never could." I stared at him, disbelief crashing over me. "I've bled for this country, I've saved lives, and none of it matters to you." He shrugged. "You did your duty, that's all. But Daniel can build something greater. That's what matters." I walked out of that house knowing something I'd always feared. In my father's eyes, I was not a Carter worth honoring. And yet, the harder they tried to erase me, the more determined I became, because truth doesn't vanish. It waits, it lingers, it burns. One evening, while sifting through old mission files, I found a recording. Helmet cam footage from one of my soldiers. Grainy, shaky, but clear enough to show me in the field, issuing orders, pulling civilians to safety, rallying my team under fire. It was undeniable, raw, real. I watched it 3 times. My throat tightened. This was my proof, my story, my voice. The question was, when to use it, and against whom? But before I tell you how I chose, I want to hear from you. Have you ever held evidence of the truth in your hands, knowing it could shatter lies but also cost you everything? If you've lived with that choice, share it in the comments. Because sometimes the hardest battle isn't against the enemy outside. It's against the silence inside your own home. As Daniel's star rose, General Conroy's shadow lengthened. He and my father made appearances with Daniel at charity galas, policy forums, even private dinners with senators. Photos splashed across social media, Daniel flanked by powerful men, my father at his side. And me, I became a name mentioned only in whispers, often followed by doubt. But every time they lifted him higher, they unknowingly handed me more reason to fight. Because what they forgot is this: you cannot build a legacy on stolen ground. Not forever. And as you'll see in the next chapter, shadows have a way of turning into fire. When betrayal threatened to drown me, I did what soldiers do. I went quiet. I shut the door on the noise of politics and headlines. My TV stayed dark. The stack of newspapers that bore my brother's face lay untouched by the door. My ribbons and medals, once carefully polished, gathered dust in the closet. Even my uniform began to feel less like a second skin and more like an artifact of a life I no longer recognized. But the silence, as heavy as it was, didn't last, because silence has cracks, and through those cracks light began to seep in. It came first in small ways. A late-night message from Sergeant Alvarez. "Ma'am, I just want you to know you saved my life in that convoy. Don't ever forget it." A letter from Corporal Jenkins, scrawled on notebook paper. "My daughter turns 3 today. I get to be here because of you." A voicemail from Private Ellis, his voice breaking. "You told me once I was stronger than I thought. You were right." Each word landed like pebbles on still water, sending ripples through my despair. They reminded me that beyond the headlines and the politics, the truth was not erased. It lived in the men and women who had followed me, trusted me, survived because of me. And let me ask you, have you ever felt abandoned by those closest to you, only to be lifted by people you never expected? Sometimes the ones who stand in the fire with you end up being the family you never had. If you've ever found family that way, let me know in the comments. Because those bonds, those invisible threads, they're what kept me alive. One evening, my inbox pinged with an email marked with the Pentagon's insignia. The subject line was short: "Meeting request Colonel Sophia Nguyen." I had heard her name long before. In the military, legends don't need introductions, and she was one. Sophia Nguyen, decorated, brilliant, a strategist who had survived every barrier the old guard had thrown at her. She was one of the few women whose name carried weight in the halls of the Department of Defense. She wasn't someone you stumbled into. She was someone who chose who she let in. When I walked into her office, the first thing I noticed was how spare it was. Diplomas lined one wall, a small orchid sat blooming in the window, a stack of files sat perfectly squared on her desk. She rose when I entered, her presence commanding but not intimidating. Her eyes met mine, sharp and assessing, yet warm enough to let me breathe. "Colonel Carter," she said, extending her hand. "I've been following your career." I almost laughed. "That's funny. My career seems to have disappeared from the public record lately." Her lips twitched in the faintest smile. "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you." We sat across from each other, the weight of silence between us. Then she leaned forward, elbows on her desk, her voice low but steady. "I know what's happening to you. I know your story's being buried under politics and egos. But you need to understand something. Medals tarnish. Headlines fade. Honor doesn't live in the ribbons on your chest. It lives in the people who will still follow you after the shooting stops." Her words hit me harder than any headline ever had. Who will still follow you after the shooting stops? I thought of my soldiers, of Alvarez, Jenkins, Ellis. I thought of the civilians we had carried through smoke and fire. My father might erase me, my brother might wear my words, but those people, they remembered. Have you ever had someone speak into your life so clearly it felt like they had read your soul? That's what Sophia did for me that day. And if you've ever had a mentor whose words changed the way you saw yourself, tap like right now. Because those people deserve to be honored too. Sophia didn't just give me encouragement. She gave me strategy. She urged me to document everything, every mission, every briefing, every piece of proof I still held. She told me to gather testimony, to preserve my truth even if the world insisted on rewriting it. "Your story matters," she said, "but you need to guard it like it's classified. Because to them, erasing you is a tactic. To you, remembering is survival." I left her office carrying something I hadn't felt in months: resolve. Yet the most powerful reminder came not from a decorated colonel in Washington, but from a dusty village half a world away. It was months later when I finally had a chance to revisit the region where we had once evacuated civilians. The air was thick with spice and smoke, the streets alive with children darting between carts. And then, out of the crowd, a woman approached me. Her hair was streaked with gray now, but her eyes burned with recognition. "You," she whispered. "You were the one." At first, I didn't understand. But then she reached into her satchel and pulled out a faded piece of cloth. A scarf, frayed at the edges, stained with time. She pressed it into my hands. "You covered my daughter with this when the bombs were falling. You carried her in your arms. She lives because of you." My throat closed. My hands shook. I stared at that scarf, at the dust and the threads worn thin. Of all the medals I'd ever been given, none had ever felt heavier or holier than that scrap of fabric. Isn't it strange how the smallest tokens can hold the greatest weight? Do you have something like that? An object that means nothing to the world, but everything to you? Share it in the comments if you do, because those are the treasures that anchor us when everything else is stripped away. That woman invited me to her home. It wasn't much, walls of clay, a roof patched with tin, but it was filled with warmth. Her daughter, the little girl I had once shielded with that scarf, was taller now, maybe 10. She ran to me, threw her arms around my waist, laughing. I felt tears sting my eyes as I hugged her back. They prepared a meal for me. Simple rice, roasted vegetables, bread warm from the fire. And as we sat on the floor, eating together, the woman looked at me and said, "To us, you are not forgotten. To us, you are family." Those words healed something in me my own family had broken. When I returned home, I placed that scarf carefully into the box in my basement, the same box where my parents had shoved my diplomas, my medals, my photographs. But this time, I didn't put it there out of shame. I put it there out of reverence. This scarf wasn't just an award, it was proof. Proof that honor wasn't bestowed by my father or claimed by my brother. It was built, one act of humanity at a time. Back in Washington, Sophia introduced me to others like me. Soldiers whose stories had been stolen, whose voices had been silenced by politics. There was Captain Hayes, a pilot who had crash-landed his burning plane and saved his crew, only to have another officer take the credit. Lieutenant Marks, a medic whose battlefield innovation had saved dozens, yet she was told to stay quiet because it didn't fit the narrative. We met in quiet corners, over coffee in dim diners, and in whispered conversations in corridors. We shared our stories, traded our wounds like currency, and in that exchange we found strength. We laughed, we cried, we remembered, and slowly the burden I had carried alone became lighter. Have you ever found yourself surrounded by people who knew your pain without you having to explain it? That's what these soldiers gave me. If you've ever had a circle like that, friends who understood without judgment, write yes in the comments. Because those bonds are rare and they deserve to be named. One evening, I attended a small gathering of veterans at a community hall. Folding chairs, weak coffee, the smell of old wood. But when I looked around that room, I saw faces marked by survival. Men with prosthetic legs. Women with scars running down their arms. People who had carried the weight of war and come back different. When I stood to speak, I thought my voice might shake. Instead, it rang steady. "I know what it's like to be forgotten," I told them. "I know what it's like to have your story stolen, but I also know this: no one can erase the truth we carry in our bones." The applause that followed wasn't loud or wild. It was steady, solid, the kind that told me I wasn't alone. And yet, even as hope glimmered, I knew the shadows hadn't vanished. My father's hand still guided Daniel's rise. General Conroy still whispered in the ears of senators. The campaign against me still churned. But now I wasn't empty-handed. I had Sophia's mentorship. I had allies in the ranks. I had testimony, evidence, the scarf. And most importantly, I had not given up. So let me pause here. If you're still listening, if you've stayed with me this far, it means something in this story is resonating. So let me ask you, Who are the allies in your life? The ones who remind you of your worth when the world tries to tell you otherwise. Write their names in the comments. Let's honor them together. Because the truth is, none of us can fight alone. And in the chapters ahead, you'll see how those allies, those sparks, became the fire I needed to face the storm. Sometimes the glimmer of hope doesn't come from where you expected. Sometimes it comes from a mentor's words, a soldier's memory, a scarf pressed into your hand by a woman who never forgot. And that, more than medals, more than headlines, is how I began to rise again. The call came on a Tuesday morning, gray and heavy with rain. I was at my desk, sipping lukewarm coffee, scrolling through mission reports when the phone on the corner of my desk buzzed. The voice on the other end was clipped, formal, stripped of warmth. Colonel Carter, you are hereby suspended from duty pending investigation into allegations of mishandling classified information. Please report to headquarters immediately. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard correctly. The words seemed unreal, as if spoken through water. Suspended, investigation, classified breach. My hand tightened around the receiver until the plastic creaked. I forced my voice steady. What information? But the line went dead. Have you ever had the floor ripped out from under you in a single sentence? That's what it felt like free-falling through air with nothing to catch me. Tell me in the comments if you've ever lived through that kind of gut punch, because sometimes life doesn't give us warning shots. Sometimes it just detonates. When I arrived at headquarters, the world tilted further. The security guard at the entrance, a young corporal I'd known for years, couldn't meet my eyes. My ID badge was taken, my access revoked. My colleagues stood back as though I carried a contagion. Whispered words followed me like smoke, espionage, leak, liability. I sat in a small room, bare walls closing in, while an investigator slid a thick folder across the table. Evidence, he said. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were emails, reports, notes, documents suggesting I had shared sensitive mission details with unauthorized contacts. Details only someone inside would know. Details only I had handled. Except they weren't mine. The language wasn't my own. Phrases twisted, facts manipulated, timelines bent until they formed a damning picture. My name stamped across pages like a scarlet letter. My stomach turned cold. This isn't true, I whispered. The investigator's expression was flat. The review board will decide. That night I sat alone in my apartment, rain tapping against the windows. My uniform hung in the closet, useless. My future, my career, my honor, suspended in the balance. And then in the middle of that silence, my computer pinged. An anonymous email, no subject line, just an attachment. I opened it with dread, my heart pounding. Inside was a single file, a string of forwarded emails, and there it was, my father's name in the sender line. His words, sharp and unyielding. Alina has always been too stubborn, too emotional to lead effectively. She lacks the judgment necessary to uphold the Carter legacy. Daniel, on the other hand, embodies discipline, intelligence, and composure. He is the future of this family name. I strongly recommend shifting focus and support away from her and toward him. Her removal will prevent further embarrassment. I read it once, twice, 10 times, each word slicing deeper. It wasn't strangers who had turned against me. It wasn't enemies in the field. It was my own father. Tell me, how do you even begin to process betrayal like that? Is it anger that comes first, or grief? Would you scream? Would you collapse? Or would you sit in silence, numb, because there are no words big enough for that kind of wound? Share your thoughts, because I want to know how you would have survived that moment. I printed the email and held it in my hands, the paper trembling. My father's voice, once the voice that told bedtime stories, the voice that lectured me about discipline, the voice I had longed to hear say, "I'm proud of you," now reduced me to an obstacle, an inconvenience, too stubborn, too emotional, unfit to lead. For years, I had bent my back trying to prove I was enough. And here was the truth in black and white. Nothing I did would ever be enough. The days that followed blurred into one another. I was confined to administrative limbo, stripped of authority, watched like a suspect. Daniel, meanwhile, soared. His face lit up television screens, his speeches praised by pundits. At one gala, he stood beside General Conroy, my father at his shoulder, cameras flashing like fireworks. The Carter legacy, the papers called him. A symbol of promise. And me, I became a cautionary tale whispered in corners. But beneath the humiliation, a new fire sparked. They thought they had silenced me. They thought they had ended me. But they had underestimated the one thing they could never control, the truth. One evening, I met with Sophia Nguyen in a quiet cafe, the kind where no one looks too closely, where conversations dissolve into the hum of espresso machines. She studied me with steady eyes, scanning the fatigue on my face. "They've come for me," I said simply. She didn't look surprised. "Of course they have. When you threaten power, power strikes back." I slid the printed email across the table. It was my father. She read it in silence, her jaw tightening. Then she looked up, her voice calm but fierce. "Alina, you cannot let this break you. They want you broken because it makes their story cleaner. But you have proof, and proof is power." Her words anchored me, but proof alone wasn't enough. I needed voices, testimonies, people willing to stand up even when it cost them. So I reached out. One by one, I called my soldiers, Alvarez, Jenkins, Ellis, others whose names I carried in my heart like dog tags. I asked them to write their accounts, to tell the truth of what they had seen, of the missions I had led, of the lives we had saved. Some hesitated, fearful of repercussions. But others, many others, said yes. "You never left us behind, ma'am," Jenkins told me. "We won't leave you now." Their loyalty lit something inside me that even betrayal couldn't extinguish. Still, the hardest confrontation loomed. I knew I had to face my father. Not as a daughter begging for love, but as a soldier demanding truth. I drove to the family ranch, the Texas summer air heavy and suffocating. The house loomed, the same walls that had held my childhood laughter, my teenage arguments, my mother's quiet silences. My father was in his study, as always, cigar smoke curling in the air. When he looked up, there was no surprise in his eyes, only irritation. "You shouldn't be here," he said. I dropped the printed email on his desk. "Why?" My voice was steady, but my heart thundered. "Why would you do this to me?" He leaned back, steepling his fingers, his expression unreadable. "Because you were never meant to lead this family. You don't understand legacy. You don't understand politics. Daniel does. You were always too reckless, too emotional. You think honor comes from bleeding in the dirt, but real honor comes from building power." My hands shook, but I refused to back down. Real honor comes from truth, from dignity, from lives saved. You wouldn't know that because you've never stood in the fire. You only watch from your leather chair. His eyes hardened. "You are nothing but a soldier, replaceable. Daniel will make this family matter. You were a distraction." Those words cut deeper than any wound I'd ever taken. I walked out of that house with tears burning my eyes, but also with a clarity I'd never felt before. I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore. I was fighting for every soldier who had ever been erased, for every woman who had been told she was too much or not enough, for every voice silenced by men who mistook legacy for control. The investigation pressed on. Hearings loomed. My reputation dangled on the edge of ruin, but I carried my proof. I carried my testimonies. I carried the scarf, tucked safely in my bag, a reminder that honor wasn't theirs to give or take. And I carried resolve. Because the battle was no longer about saving my career. It was about something far greater, reclaiming the truth, no matter the cost. So let me pause here. If you've ever faced betrayal from the very people meant to protect you, I want you to know this: you are not defined by their lies. You are defined by your truth. If you believe that, type truth in the comments. Let's flood this story with it. As I prepared for the confrontation that would decide everything, I thought of Sophia's words, "Who will still follow you after the shooting stops." And I knew, no matter what the outcome, I would not be alone. Because sometimes the greatest battles are not fought with bullets or bombs. They are fought with truth. And my war had only just begun. The morning of the hearing dawned gray, with clouds pressed low over Washington like a lid sealing a boiling pot. The city seemed to hum with tension. Outside the Capitol, the steps were choked with cameras, reporters shouting questions, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Some faces in the crowd held signs of support. "We believe you, Colonel Carter." Others bore sharp words that cut like glass: "Traitor," "Shame." Walking toward those steps, I felt every stare press against me. The flash of cameras was blinding, the noise relentless. Yet inside, I clutched a steadiness I hadn't known I still carried. My dress uniform was stiff on my shoulders, my medals dull but present. They were not there for decoration, they were witnesses. As I crossed the threshold of the Capitol, a question rose inside me like a tide. Was I ready to bare my soul to the world? And let me ask you, have you ever walked into a room knowing everything you've lived for might collapse or finally make sense? Tell me in the comments if you've ever felt that weight, that razor edge between ruin and redemption. The hearing room smelled faintly of polished wood and stale air, as if centuries of battles had seeped into its walls. Long desks stretched before rows of senators and representatives. Behind them, aides shuffled papers, whispering into ears. The gallery was packed, reporters, civilians, veterans. The air vibrated with anticipation. At the witness table sat General Conroy, ramrod straight, his medals gleaming like armor. His eyes flicked toward me, cold as bayonets. Beside him, Daniel, my brother, tailored, confident, a rising star polished to perfection. He tapped his pen lightly, as if rehearsing his rhythm for the cameras. And just behind, in the gallery, sat my father, his arms crossed, his jaw clenched, the weight of his judgment heavier than any gavel. The chairman's voice cut through the buzz. "Colonel Alina Carter, please step forward." I swore the oath, lifted my chin, and sat. "Colonel Carter," a gray-haired senator began, voice sharp, "you are here accused of leaking classified mission details. Evidence suggests recklessness. Why should this committee believe otherwise?" I inhaled slowly. "Because the evidence you've been given has been twisted. Because I have proof of the truth." Another lawmaker leaned in. "Or is this simply a family feud disguised as patriotism?" Family feud. The words stabbed, because weren't they true in some way? Yet this was larger than family, it was about honor itself. I steadied my voice. "This is not about my family. This is about lives, American lives, civilian lives that were saved under my command, and about the attempt to erase that truth for political gain." The room stirred. Pens scratched across paper. Cameras zoomed closer. I opened the first folder, sliding copies across the table to each member. "These are mission logs, time-stamped, verified, signed by commanding officers. They detail decisions made under fire, my decisions, that led to the evacuation of 300 civilians." Screens at the far wall flickered on. Grainy footage filled them. From my helmet cam, smoke, chaos, civilians stumbling, children crying. My voice cut through. "Go, go, keep moving. Cover her, take her hand, she's safe." The chamber fell silent except for the crackle of gunfire echoing from the speakers. I watched the faces of the committee harden, soften, shift. A young aide dabbed his eyes. Even one of the older senators leaned back, shaken. Have you ever had to relive your hardest day, not in silence but in front of strangers? That's what I did. And I wonder if it were you, would you have the strength to press play on your own worst memory? Then I lifted the second piece of evidence. A letter written in uneven English. I unfolded it slowly. "This," I said, voice low, "is from a woman who survived that day. She sent me this with something I once gave her child. I pulled out the faded scarf, threads frayed, fabric worn thin by years of use. I held it high, letting the cameras catch it. In her words, she carried us out. She gave us life when the world gave us death. Gasps rippled through the gallery. I saw a veteran in the back straighten, eyes wet. Reporters scribbled madly. This scarf, I continued, means more than medals, more than headlines. It is proof written not by generals or journalists, but by those who lived. This is honor. The chairman leaned forward. Colonel Carter, are you suggesting there has been a coordinated effort to discredit you? Yes, I said firmly. And then I produced the email. My father, I began, my throat tightening, sent this correspondence to General Conroy and others here. It recommended my removal. It painted me as unstable, emotional, unfit. I read aloud. Alina has always been too stubborn, too emotional to lead effectively. Daniel is the future of this family name. Her removal will prevent further embarrassment. The words hung heavy in the air, each syllable echoing like a hammer strike. The room buzzed with shock. Reporters' heads snapped up. Daniel shifted uneasily. My father's face was stone, but his knuckles whitened where his hands gripped the rail. I looked straight at him, and for once, I didn't see the man I had longed for approval from. I saw only the architect of my erasure. Have you ever faced down the very person who broke you, with the world watching? What would you have said if it had been you, staring into those familiar eyes and seeing a stranger? Daniel leaned into his microphone, his tone smooth, rehearsed. This is absurd. My sister has always exaggerated. She is dramatic. She confuses heroics with recklessness. This is nothing but a personal vendetta dressed as patriotism. Whispers filled the chamber. For a moment, doubt rippled. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. Dramatic. Ask Sergeant Alvarez, who limped out alive because I refused to leave him. Ask Corporal Jenkins, whose daughter celebrated her 3rd birthday because I pulled him out of the fire. Ask the woman who sent me this scarf. Was that drama or was that truth? The gallery erupted in murmurs. Some clapped before being hushed. General Conroy spoke next, his baritone carrying authority. Colonel Carter lacks discipline. She has always believed emotion outweighs chain of command. That is dangerous in leadership. I met his words with fire. Dangerous is letting politics decide who lives and dies. Dangerous is rewriting reports to build legacies instead of saving lives. Dangerous is silence, and I refuse to be silent. But the deepest cut wasn't from Daniel or Conroy. It was from my father. As I read his email aloud, memories cascaded. Him ignoring my track medals, praising Daniel's grades. Him dismissing my commissions, boasting of Daniel's law victories. His words now, printed, immortal, were simply the final echo of a lifetime of erasure. I said quietly but clearly, "You may have given me your name, Father, but you will never define my honor." The silence after those words was heavy, electric. Even the senators leaned back, as if absorbing the quake of a daughter finally severing the chain of expectation. I rose to my feet, my voice steady, the chamber holding its breath. You can take my rank. You can strip my medals. You can drag my name through every paper in this country. But you cannot take the truth. Because truth doesn't belong to power, it belongs to those who lived it. I let the silence stretch, then finished. And honor is not inherited. It is not a family name or a title. It is not given by fathers or stolen by brothers. Honor is built, choice by choice, day by day, in the moments no one sees. And it is mine. You can never take it. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a slow, steady sound rose, applause. Quiet at first, then stronger. Soldiers in the gallery rose. A veteran saluted. A young congresswoman wiped her tears. Even one senator, once skeptical, nodded in solemn respect. Reporters flooded toward the exits, desperate to carry the story out into the world. Cameras flashed like lightning. Daniel sat frozen, his mouth tight. Conroy's jaw worked, calculating. My father stared ahead, for once stripped of power by nothing but the truth. And me, I stood tall, the scarf still in my hands, the weight of my words settling not as a burden but as freedom. If you had one chance, one microphone, one moment to tell the world who you truly are, what would you say? Write it in the comments, because someone out there needs to hear your truth. That night when I walked out into the cool Washington air, the city lights glimmered like stars scattered across Earth. The crowd still lingered, some clapping, some silent, but all watching. I held the scarf close. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. The battle was far from over, but the silence had been shattered. And sometimes that is the greatest victory of all. When the chamber emptied and the last flashbulbs dimmed, silence finally returned. I stood in the corridor, leaning against the cool marble wall, the scarf still folded in my hands. For months, the fight had consumed me, sleepless nights, endless fear, the gnawing weight of betrayal. And then, in one afternoon, everything had broken open. Yet the victory felt strange. Not triumphant, not sweet, but heavy, like the moment after a storm when branches still drip and streets glisten with floodwater. The air was clearer, yes, but the wreckage remained. 2 days later, I sat in a Pentagon office, sunlight slanting across polished floors. Across from me, a general cleared his throat. "Colonel Carter," he said, "the committee has cleared you of all charges. The evidence you presented was compelling. More than that, it has reignited public trust in your leadership. The department wishes to offer you promotion to Brigadier General." Brigadier General. The words hung between us like a crown of thorns. For years, I had chased that kind of recognition, proof that I mattered. And now it was here, handed to me. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt joy. Instead, I felt a hollowness. Because what was the point of climbing higher if the ladder itself was rotten? I thought of the faces in that gallery, the veterans who had risen to their feet, the soldiers who had written me letters, the civilians I had carried out of the fire. Their honor was not forged in titles, it was forged in choices. I looked the general in the eye. "With respect, sir, I decline." He blinked. "Decline? Do you understand what you're turning down?" "Yes," I said. My voice was calm, steady. "And I know what I'm choosing instead." "Have you ever walked away from something everyone else thought you should want? Did they call you foolish? Brave? Both? Tell me, because sometimes the hardest victories are the ones where you refuse the prize." In the weeks that followed, I thought long and hard about what mattered most. I sat at my kitchen table late into the night, papers spread before me. Notes, sketches, ideas. Words underlined, circled, scribbled, honor, truth, dignity, choice. I realized that my war was never just about my own career. It was about the next generation, those young officers and soldiers who would one day stand where I stood, faced with the same temptations, the same corruption, the same choice between truth and silence. So I decided to build something, not a monument, not a headline, but a living, breathing place. I called it the Carter Institute for Ethical Leadership. It would be a center where young leaders, military, civilian, anyone, could be trained not just in tactics or strategy, but in honor. A place where integrity was the curriculum. Where the lesson was simple: honor is not inherited, it is built. The first months were grueling, securing funding, finding allies, convincing skeptics. More than once, doors were slammed in my face. "People don't pay for ideals," one businessman sneered. "They pay for results." But then came a breakthrough. A group of veterans, men and women I had once led, pooled their voices and their savings. "We believe in you, Colonel," Alvarez told me. "You never left us behind. We're not leaving you now." Word spread. Donations trickled in, then poured. By winter, I stood in front of a weathered brick building on the edge of the city, the kind of place most people would have overlooked. But to me, it was perfect. Wide classrooms, sturdy walls, a future waiting to be carved. The first class enrolled in spring. 20 young men and women, some in uniform, some in civilian clothes. They carried notebooks, laptops, and the same nervous hope I had once carried into my first briefing room. Have you ever looked at a group of fresh faces and seen the future staring back at you? It's terrifying, isn't it? And yet, it's the most beautiful terror of all. One afternoon, as I prepared the lecture hall, I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned, I froze. It was my mother. She looked older than I remembered, her hair streaked with silver, her shoulders stooped. She held something small in her hand. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she crossed the room and pressed it into my palm. It was a medal. My old high school track medal, tarnished but intact. "I should have given this back to you years ago," she whispered. "I should have stood by you. I'm sorry, Alina." Her eyes filled with tears. Mine did too. For so long I had carried anger at her silence, her complicity. Yet now, seeing her fragile, seeing her finally reach for me, something inside me softened. I closed my fingers over the medal. "Thank you, Mom." We stood there, mother and daughter, in a classroom that smelled of chalk and fresh paint, the air between us finally free of the chains of silence. On the first day of class, I walked to the chalkboard. The students sat waiting, pens poised, eyes expectant. My mother sat quietly in the back row, hands folded, watching. I picked up the chalk, my hand steady. Slowly, deliberately, I wrote the words that had carried me through fire, betrayal, and truth. Honor is not inherited, it is built. I turned to the class. This is what we will study here. This is what we will live here. Titles fade, medals tarnish. But the choices you make, moment by moment, day by day, will carve the legacy you leave behind. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who will walk in your footsteps. Their eyes locked on mine, and I knew they understood. When I left the room that evening, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky with fire and gold. I felt no bitterness, no hunger for titles, no craving for approval. I felt peace, because the truth had been spoken, because the future was beginning, and because I finally knew. My honor was never in their hands. It was always in mine. So let me ask you, as we close this chapter, what kind of honor are you building in your life? Not the kind stamped on certificates or carved into plaques, but the kind that lives in your choices when no one is watching. Share it in the comments, because your story matters, your honor matters, and it is yours to build. 5 years later, the walls of the Carter Institute had begun to tell their own stories. When I walked the halls now, the sound of footsteps wasn't just my own. It was dozens, sometimes hundreds, of students who had passed through these rooms. Young officers with notebooks tucked under their arms. Civilian leaders with bright eyes and sharper questions. Veterans who had once thought their best days were behind them, now realizing their wisdom was still needed. The classrooms had filled, emptied, and filled again. Every semester brought new voices, new stories, new burdens carried into this place and laid down like stones. I often paused at the main corridor, where a wall of photographs had grown. Smiling faces, handshakes, group portraits of each graduating class. Beneath them, in large brass letters, the words we had written on the very first day: "Honor is not inherited, it is built." One winter morning, as snow drifted past the windows, I opened the Institute's mail. Among the bills and brochures was an envelope, worn at the edges. Inside was a photograph of a young girl, maybe 10 years old, grinning wide, holding a scarf in her hands. The letter was written by her mother, the same woman I had carried out years ago. "Colonel Carter," it began, "my daughter still sleeps with the scarf you once tied around her shoulders. She says it smells like courage. She dreams of being a doctor now, to save lives the way you saved hers. We wanted you to know that because of you, she grows in safety, in hope. Thank you." I traced the photograph with my fingers, my throat tightening. So often, we never know the ripple of our actions. And here it was in ink and paper, a ripple that had turned into a life. Have you ever received a message years later that reminded you of the impact you made, even when you had almost forgotten? Tell me in the comments, because those reminders are the lifelines we don't know we need. As the Institute grew, so did the voices of those who had walked through its doors. One graduate, now a captain, wrote back, "I was offered a shortcut, a promotion I didn't earn. I turned it down because I heard your words in my head, honor is built. I chose to build." Another, a young woman who had lost her father in combat, wrote, "I thought leadership meant filling his shoes. Now I know it means lacing my own boots." A third, a civilian from a nonprofit, said, "In the boardroom, I quoted you. They laughed at first, but later they listened." Integrity, it turns out, is a strategy too. Each story added a brick to the foundation of the Institute, not the walls, but the unseen foundation of purpose. One spring evening, we hosted a gathering for alumni and friends. The hall buzzed with laughter, the clink of glasses, the warm press of reunion. As I moved through the crowd, faces turned, older, wiser, but still shining. Near the back stood Alvarez, now teaching at the Institute himself. Jenkins, walking without crutches for the first time in years. Ellis, grayer but grinning, holding his granddaughter on his hip. And then through the throng, I saw her, the woman from that day, the one who had given me the scarf. She carried her daughter beside her, the girl from the photograph, taller now, bright-eyed. They approached. The girl reached out, clutching the same scarf. "My mama told me you saved us," she said. "When I grow up, I want to save people too." I knelt, my eyes level with hers. "Then promise me one thing," I said. "Promise me you'll always remember that saving people isn't about medals or titles. It's about choices, every day." She nodded solemnly, as if she understood more than her years. And in that moment, I felt the circle complete. On the anniversary of the Institute's founding, I stood once more in front of a classroom. The students were new, their notebooks crisp, their uniforms sharp, but the chalkboard was the same. I picked up the chalk, white dust clinging to my fingers. Slowly, I wrote the words again, the same words I had written years before. Honor is not inherited, it is built. This time, I turned to the students with a smile. 5 years ago, I wrote this for the first class. Today, I write it for you. And someday, I hope you will write it for the next generation, because these words are not mine. They belong to anyone who chooses to live them. The room was silent, every pen hovering, every eye locked. And I knew once again that the future was safe in their hands. When I look back now, I no longer see the betrayal, the hearings, the headlines. I see the ripples, the girl with the scarf, the students who carried my words into boardrooms, into battlefields, into their everyday lives. I see my mother in the back row, her quiet pride finally free. And I know this. The legacy of the Carter family is not the one my father tried to build. It is this: a living legacy carved in choices, in truth, in honor. Because honor is not a gift. It is not a bloodline. It is not inherited. It is built. And now, as I close this story, I want to speak to you, the one watching, listening. You've stayed with me through every chapter, every wound, every victory. Thank you for giving me your time, your heart, your ears. But don't just carry my story. Carry your own. Ask yourself, what kind of honor are you building today? What legacy will your choices carve? If this story touched you, if you found a piece of yourself in it, please like this video. It helps us know these stories matter. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. Every week, we share stories of courage, resilience, and truth, stories that remind us that honor is not inherited. It is built. Together, let's keep building.